again, Canadian football fans, and welcome to part 2 of our look at the 1987 CFL All-Stars. And we'll be looking at the East Division, and if you haven't watched our look at the West Division in part 1, the link is in the upper right corner and in the description. Watch it right now. But continuing where we left off for those who have watched the divisional realignment with the Montreal Alouettes folding and the Blue Bombers switching to the East Division was having a huge effect, as only 10 of 27 selections in the West made the All-Canadian team, meaning this will be a big year for the East. But before we get into it, let's take a look at what else went down in the world of Canadian sports in 1987. It has been called the greatest tournament in the history of international hockey, and maybe even hockey in general, the 1987 Canada Cup. The media hype of the two best in the game, Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, playing alongside each other, definitely lived up to and maybe even exceeded expectations. Alongside them were 10 other Hall of Fame players and many other All-Stars, and what led to a historic best-of-3 finals with the Soviet national team. All 3 games were a roller coaster thrill ride, culminating in the infamous setup from Gretzky to Lemieux in Game 3 with just over a minute to play, giving Canada the title. Speaking of hockey, just a few months prior to this historic tournament, Wayne Gretzky's reign of rule was back on top again. After a shocking upset the year prior, the Oilers returned to the Stanley Cup final and won, but it took them 7 games to defeat a tough Philadelphia Flyers squad to win it. Gretzky led the playoffs in scoring, capturing his 3rd Stanley Cup in 4 seasons, and winner of the league scoring title for the 7th straight season, his 5th Pearson Trophy as NHLPA MVP, and the league MVP for the 8th straight season every year he had been in the league at that point. Also in hockey, 1987 was also the infamous year of the punch-up in Paistani at the World Juniors, when the Canadian team and the Soviet team engaged in an all-out brawl that resulted in both teams being disqualified from the tournament. In other sports, it was a heartbreaking year for the Montreal Expos and the Toronto Blue Jays in a game of baseball. The Jays were in the thick of things, winning the AL East. They led by the bat of George Bell. They were 3.5 games up on the Tigers, but the team completely collapsed with a week to go in the season, losing 7 straight, including being swept by the Tigers. The Expos, however, had a rougher go, despite finishing 91-71, a year after losing Andre Dawson, but still led by speedy leadoff man Tim Raines. They were in the thick of things in the final month, but ultimately finished 3rd in the NL East. Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson stunned the world when he defeated the dominant Carl Lewis at the 1987 World Athletic Championships in Rome, taking home the gold in the 100-meter dash. Johnson made headlines all over Canada with his performance and was touted as the next big Canadian Olympic star. While that came true, the joy was short-lived. Johnson was stripped of this accolade due to the future steroid scandal. And now, back to football. And well, it wasn't really a surprise, as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in their first year in the East dominated with a 12-6 record, finishing in first place. However, this is the first time the Bombers have finished first in any division since 1972, despite having tremendous success in the 80s. Finishing second place, however, is the Toronto Argonauts with an 11-6-1 record, and they easily disposed of the defending Grey Cup champion and hated rivals Hamilton Tiger Cats in the Eastern semis. Now, here's the thing, the Ticats actually had a 3-year streak of winning the East Division, and then the Argos, advancing to the Eastern Final, stunned the Bombers as their defense dominated them in a bit of an upset, making it their 3rd Grey Cup appearance in 6 seasons before suffering a heartbreaking loss to the Edmonton Eskimos in the big game. In 3rd place, the Hamilton Tiger Cats were the league's biggest letdown. Their defending champions went on a 5-game winning streak that put them at 6-3 at the halfway point. Then a puzzling 7-game losing streak allowed them to only finish 1-8 in the second half of the season for an overall 7-11 record, but they still made the playoffs for the 10th straight season, which is actually the 2nd longest active streak in the CFL, only behind the Eskimos. And then in dead last in the East and in the entire league, the sad-looking Ottawa Not-So-Rough Riders, with an abysmal 3-15 record. At least their prairie counterparts, the Green Riders, had promise ahead. This team, internally and on the field, was a complete and utter disaster. But now we go to the All-Stars, starting with special teams. At first, we start off with Eastern return specialist Darnell Clash, who obtains his 2nd selection, his first being with the Lions during their Grey Cup year in 1985. However, that selection was as a defensive back, which he was still no slouch at this year with 5 interceptions. But after leaving BC early in the year, he joined the Toronto Argonauts and brought some excitement and life to their special teams. He was 2nd in the CFL with 853 punt return yards and returned 1 for a touchdown. And he was quite a treat to watch, eluding special team tacklers. But what makes this a little more impressive is that Clash had pretty bad knees most of the season, but was still key in helping the Argos make it to the Grey Cup. But unfortunately, this would be his final year, leaving the game at the age of 25. At punter, we stick with the Argos and one of the best to ever boot it, Hank Olisic. And Hank not only had a foot of steel, he was also a smart punter who knew how to pick his angles, also give the ball some airtime for his teammates to get the returner for the tackle. He was a soccer-style kicker and strategic as they get, and was truly among the best of all time in this position. His 11 punt singles were tied for the league best, tied with Ottawa's Ken Clark. His 22.6-yard average is only 0.2 behind league leader and Western pick, Glenn Harper of Calgary. Also a very impressive 6,268 punt yards, 4th best in the league. This is Hank's 6th All-Star selection and 2nd with the Argos, and played in his 8th Grey Cup game as he collected 5 rings with the Eskimos and 1 with the Argos, all coming between 1978 and 83. Hank also obtains his 6th All-Canadian selection, giving the East their only All-Canadian special team selection. At kicker, a bit of a surprising choice, the Ottawa Rough Riders and Dean Dorsey. And this was his 2nd selection, his first being in 1985. Now, Dorsey was a very talented kicker. As a matter of fact, his 81.8 field goal percentage, which was 2nd best in the league, and that would be likely the reason for his selection. His 36 field goals made was 5th best, not bad. His 141 points were getting good, but not in the league top 5. Some saw this as a sympathy vote due to Ottawa's terrible year, and that this should have been a clean sweep for the Argos and special teams, as Lance Chomick had a really good year and perhaps should have gotten it as well. Be that as it may, Dorsey's talent helped obtain a brief stint in the NFL for a couple seasons, but returned to the CFL to finish his career. Now, let's go to the defense. At defensive end, the Argos obtained another selection, and not surprising at all, as they had an incredible defense, and we start with Rodney Harding. Highly talented pass rusher with quickness that can evade blocking linemen, was able to frustrate QBs under pressure and, of course, take them down, and did so with 13 sacks. It's his 3rd year as a pro and 2nd selection, which he had one last year with the Argos, and he's been a major part of the growth of this powerful Argo defense that ultimately led them to the Grey Cup. Harding's talents were recognized as he was named Lineman of the Week 3 times during this season and gave the Argos the edge against powerful offenses. Harding was a star on the rise and would be an important part of the Argos for years to come. We then head south of the QEW to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and their first selection on this list so far, defensive end, the great Grover Covington. Despite not being dominant as they were in the past, the Cats' defense was their major highlight this season. And much like Reggie White in the NFL, Grover was considered the CFL the ball, get the jump on him. 75 tackles he obtained, 7th best in the league. With his sharp prowess, barely anyone could get much going by him. He was also a great cover man. He's also a big part of the blitzing linebacking core, as the Bombers are one of the best in the league at putting pressure on both QBs as well as running backs, taking them down for losses, and West was big in that regard, no doubt. And speaking of QBs, they had a reason to fear him too, as he attained 7 sacks. This is the second selection of West's career, but the first since 1983 when he was a member of the Stampeders. This was also, however, his very first selection as an All-Canadian due to his career year. Sticking with the Bombers, we move to the trash-talking QB sacking Tyrone Jones. His 4th consecutive selection, Jones wasn't just every QB's worst nightmare. However, his 15 sacks tied for 5th best in the league, but he was every offensive coordinator's worst nightmare. Jones was a hard guy to prepare to play against. No matter how good your offense might be, no matter how good your QB might be, he was unpredictable with what he could bring to the table. He wasn't just a pass rusher. He wanted to get into the head of his opponents, frustrate them. If he wasn't going to be the one to make the play, he was damn sure going to see that one of his teammates did. He was the man the Bombers built an offensive strategy around. He made teammates around him better, including the before-mentioned James West. His importance to the team was further emphasized with his 4th straight divisional selection, and that comes with his 4th straight All-Canadian selection, as the East now take up 2/3 of the linebacking core. And the final Eastern linebacker selection is a former Bomber but current Ticat at this point, the highly underrated Frank Robinson. This is his first selection. A 7-season veteran with 2 Grey Cup rings to his credit, Robinson's impact on the Ticat defense despite the rough season was indeed very forceful. Considered small even for a CFL linebacker, Robinson still used every fiber of his being to obtain a tackle and garnered 64 of them, but his size and quickness also allowed him to be an efficient cover man, as he scored 5 interceptions on the season, and could also capture a loose ball quicker than most with 3 fumble recoveries. Robinson was a big reason why the Ticat defense had a lot of success this season. And now we move to the defensive secondary, and the Bombers, like the Lions, were dominant in that regard. We start with the CFL's interception leader, Roy Bennett. A remarkable 13 picks, just 2 shy of the CFL record of 15 held by Al Brenner back in 1972. Bennett had remarkable focus, quickness, and toughness, as his 67 tackles would dictate. His ability to read a pattern is what led him to take the ball away 13 times, but he would also cause incompletions by swatting the ball away or a jarring hit that can cause the ball to shake loose before it's even fully caught. And of course, all-around tight coverage. Bennett stepped up in this role after the career of 7-time All-Star David Shaw came to an untimely end, the year prior that is, as this was Bennett's 2nd straight and overall selection. This would also result in Bennett receiving his 2nd All-Canadian selection, and then the NFL came calling. He'd spent 2 years with the Chargers before returning to the CFL in 1991 with Edmonton before retiring for good. We're sticking with the Bombers at cornerback and go to James Jefferson and his first selection. Pure speed and quick hands when it came to snagging a pass for a quick pick, and his 8 interceptions were tied for 4th best in the league. He returned 2 of his picks for touchdowns. He added 51 tackles and recovered 3 fumbles, as his quickness worked in many different ways when it came to turnovers. Much like Bennett, he could read a passing play easier than a book and found multiple ways to break it up. He complemented his secondary perfectly, much like the rest of his teammates. Jefferson also received an All-Canadian selection for his efforts this year. And hey, we're still with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at defensive back with his 3rd selection, Ken Haley. Perhaps the fastest man on an already fast Bombers secondary, averaging nearly 14.5 yards per interception return and returned 168 yards for a touchdown. Haley was also one of the smaller men on this Bombers secondary, but was no stranger to taking people down with his 60 tackles. He was also good at forcing a player out of bounds in a catch attempt. Despite the accolades, he was quite underrated when it comes to discussing great defensive backs of this time period. But regardless, he is still recognized with his 3rd All-Canadian selection as well. And for the next defensive back selection, we actually moved to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and arguably one of the best pure covermen of the 1980s, Howard Fields. Fields was fast, furious, determined, and stuck to receivers like glue. While his 2 interceptions may not seem like much to the untrained eye, he was the type of guy who covered tight right off the snap, and was quick to get in a receiver's face, holding even some of the best in the league to little to no catches a game. It's what he did best, and should get the type of credit that teammates Les Brown and Paul Bennett get. And he also put up 60 tackles and recovered 2 fumbles. This is the 4th selection of Fields' career. And to complete the secondary, we go back to Winnipeg, one of the best safeties of this era, CFL Shenley Award winner as the most outstanding Canadian with his 3rd straight selection, Scott Flagel. Able to cover the long ball with precision, as his 5 interceptions dictate, with great size, tremendous hitter causing many incompletions, as well as fumbles, with his 3 recoveries to go with his huge year. Truly great at disrupting plays in the backfield or against the run, Flagel could do it all from that safety position. He was the true anchor of the secondary and was well loved in the Peg, as he indeed was a hometown boy. He ran that secondary like a smooth sailing ship, and it clearly shows how he helped make those around him work harder. No matter who you were on the other side, Flagel was determined to take every offense down. His outstanding Canadian win marks the 4th time in the 1980s someone from this club has won the award. Flagel's award-winning year results in him achieving his 2nd straight overall All-Star selection, and that completes the defense. 2/3 of it, 8 spots belonging to the East. But again, many feel this is due to the Bombers move, clearly still considered a Western team. It was split 6-6, 50-50 in 1985 and 1981 and 1970, but this is the first time since 1977 the East has had more All-Canadian selections than the West on defense. There were some in the CFL media that felt the Argos didn't get enough love on defense, as they had a pretty diverse group of talent. Reggie Pleasant at defensive back was one of them. They're tremendous here. His 9 picks were tied for 2nd in the league. He returned them for over 180 yards. Meanwhile, Willie Pless, one of the all-time great linebackers to ever play in the CFL, was just in his 2nd year at this point, but had an incredible year. And some felt that this was again a CFL skewing favoritism for the West because the Bombers had moved. Well, now we move to the offense and start with the offensive line. First, we have the Toronto Argonauts and Ian Beckstead at center. After a year away from the game, he returned with his best year ever and first ever All-Star selection. At a towering height and a perfect size to be quick off the snap and to the block, Beckstead was key in the success of the Argos' successful running game, in addition to communication with QB Gil Renfro, who had a breakout year. No matter who faced him on the opposing defensive line, it was hard to fool Beckstead, and more often than not, he was ready for just about anyone. He also played in his 2nd Grey Cup game, having been a late-season addition for the Argos Grey Cup win in 1983. We stick with the Argos and we move to the guard position and ferocious Dan Ferroni. A very popular fan favorite in Toronto and a product of Oakville, Ontario, garners his 5th straight selection dating back to the Argos Grey Cup win in '83, which again he was a huge part of. So in addition to being popular, he was damn good. A 2-time finalist for the CFL's most outstanding offensive lineman, he was a man with nothing but winning on his mind and in his heart. He was a great leader and could read any incoming blitz from any defender. He was smart and strategic, but also showed major, ferocity out there. Ferroni is recognized for his skills up front and receives his 3rd All-Canadian selection as a result, previously garnering back-to-back selections in '84 and '85. We move back to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and this is the guard position, and to Nick Bastaya, who earns his 6th Divisional All-Star selection, his first dating back to 1979, and 5th as a member of the Bombers. 2 years prior to this, he was the CFL's most outstanding offensive lineman, and now in his 13th CFL season at 34 years old, he's still as good as he ever was. Very old-school style offensive lineman, not afraid to get gritty. Bastaya was a major part of the Bombers' resurgence in the 1980s. At times, even 2 defensive linemen couldn't get by this fierce competitor. And we're back to the Toronto Argonauts as we hit the first tackle selection on the offensive line, and indeed the first selection for Big Chris Schultz. A towering 6'8", and over 270 pounds, Schultz was the wall that even the best defensive lineman couldn't seem to solve. No matter who came his way, he was there. The man who could take on anybody and everybody, and could even knock them on their asses, and make it known that they'd have to do better to get through him. He showed aggression and top-notch protection for anyone he was blocking for. This was a breakout year for Schultz. He was the man who truly completed this rock-solid Argos offensive line. And with that, he is also rewarded with his first All-Canadian selection. And hey, the other offensive tackle selection goes to the best to do it in the league that year, and maybe even of all time. Winnipeg Blue Bomber, Chris Walby. 6'7", 325 pounds, was key in protecting star QB Tommy Clements and anyone carrying the ball behind him for the Bombers, such as star running back Willard Reeves. A hometown hero, his tremendous blocking skills and ability to read opposing linemen earned him not only his 4th straight and overall All-Star selection, but his first award, winning the Shenley Awards for CFL's most outstanding offensive lineman. He is the 3rd Winnipeg player in 4 seasons to win the award, and the 4th Bomber player to win it in the 1980s. An offensive tackle with the heart of a warrior, Walby took his position very seriously, and he showed it game in and game out. This is also his fourth straight All-Canadian selection as the East takes up 3/5 of the offensive line. And now, we move to the receiving corps. The first slotback selection, we stay with the Bombers and Perry Tuttle, a former NFL journeyman. Tuttle has found a home in Winnipeg in his second season with the club. He launches his second straight season with over 1,300 yards, finishing sixth in the league with 1,310. He was sixth in receptions with 75. He also garners his first CFL All-Stars selection, a quick pattern slotback whose reflexes and great hands allow him to fool defenders. Also, with some speed on his side, Tuttle can garner those extra yards and could also play wideout when needed. Not afraid to go up the middle and take risks, he was great at hanging on to catch after catch no matter how hard he would get hit. And with that, Tuttle is recognized for his great year with his first All-Canadian selection. Next, also at slotback, we have Darrell K. Smith of the Eastern Division champion Toronto Argonauts. His second year in the CFL was a breakout year. 1,392 yards, were fifth best in the league, as were his 79 receptions, and he added 10 touchdowns. Smith had height and a great reach to make those high catches. His smooth hands and long strides made him a hard receiver to catch. He gave the Argos offense, easy for me to say, a much-needed boost, and helped Gilbert Renfro break out as the Argos' main starter at QB. Smith was good at fooling defensive backs, and even in tight coverage, could find a way to evade them, and was hard to bring down. He was everything that was needed in a star catcher. And indeed, Smith's breakout year also led him to receive his first ever All-Canadian selection. The East takes both slotback spots. And we move south of the QEW again to Hamilton, and the Ticats at wide receiver, Steve Stapler. A veteran of 8 seasons, 7 of which were spent with the Ticats, he had a career year with 1,516 yards, second best in the CFL. His 85 catches were also second best, and tied for first in receiving touchdowns with 13. This is actually Stapler's first 1,000-yard season despite being a CFL All-Star in 1985, as this is indeed his second selection. He had speed, great eyes, quick hands, fast reflexes. He was a coach's dream. While his size was deemed an issue even in the CFL, he made a great home for himself as one of the most popular Ticat players of this era. He was the only consistent spark in the Ticat offense despite cooling off a little bit late in the year. But this is why he was likely snubbed of an All-Canadian selection, something that didn't sit well with the Hamilton sports media. Stapler would play only one more season before retiring. The next receiver would be another selection for Winnipeg, and maybe even the most exciting receiver of this era, and perhaps one of the most exciting and skilled receivers of all time in CFL history, James "Quick" Murphy. 1 year removed from winning the CFL's most outstanding player, he continues to deliver. His second straight All-Star selection, his fourth career 1,000-yard season, and what is his fifth CFL season. He had 1,110 yards, 9th best in the league, and a third best 84 receptions. Murphy was dynamic in every way. He could make big plays with high effort, but looked great in doing so. He was pretty much a weekly fixture on TSN's highlight reels. Murphy was also great at any situation. You need to pick up a few yards? Well, hey, stay short and he could do it. Staying close to the sidelines to stop the clock? He could do it. Going long? Oh yeah, that too. Bringing defensive backs badly? Oh yeah. Exciting catches? Up the wazoo. Dynamic and skilled, Murphy truly did have it all. The East-West split the receiving selections, and now we move to the backfield. And back to the Eastern champion Argos and their rookie sensation, Gil the Thrill Finnerty, the Shenley Award winner for CFL's most outstanding rookie. He lives up to his nickname with 879 rushing yards, was the second leading rusher in the league, and also added over 400 receiving yards. Gil was an exciting runner who could make big plays and look spectacular evading tacklers, as he too was a human highlight reel it seemed. In incoming barrages, hey, that was nothing for him. He was an expert at following blocks, would make that extra leap for a touchdown or extra yardage. Finnerty wasn't too tall, but he wasn't too short. Had some weight on him, but not overly big. But all that played to his advantage. He could power through attempted tacklers, as well as speed up against them. His big year is further highlighted with his first All-Canadian selection. And the other running back slot goes to one of the most talented players of this era, Winnipeg Blue Bombers star, Willard Reeves, leading the CFL in rushing with 1,471 yards, the second best mark of his career, and third time in his 5 CFL seasons he has led the league in rushing. This is Reeves' fourth selection of his career, a big year for him, as he was coming off an injury-plagued 1986 season where he only played 6 games, missing 12. A former outstanding player winner 3 years prior, Reeves, like the before-mentioned Finnerty, was a man who could use his size when necessary. But he had ridiculous speed when he could break away from defenders. He could use that stiff arm, but also make the right moves. And with that amazing offensive line in front of him, he used every good block to his advantage. And even Reeves could throw a good block himself. He was very dynamic. And with all this, Reeves would achieve his third and final All-Canadian selection. The only year he didn't accomplish that feat was in his rookie year. This would be his last CFL season, as he tried for an NFL career afterwards, but sadly that did not pan out, and he retired after 1989. The East takes both slots in running back, and now we go to the one blank spot remaining, quarterback. And yes, it goes to one of the all-time greats, Winnipeg Blue Bomber and the Shelly Award winner for the CFL's most outstanding player, Tom Clements. He won the award for the first time in his 12 seasons in the CFL, being the third Bomber in 4 seasons to win it. As you can see, Bombers clearly dominate the Shenley Awards. This is the 5th time this decade a Winnipeg player has won it, in which now he achieves his 7th and final All-Star selection, his first dating back to his rookie year in 1975 as a member of the Ottawa Rough Riders, where he would garner 3. He garnered 2 selections in Hamilton, and now this is his 2nd in Winnipeg. His 4,686 passing yards led the league, and his 2nd highest total of his career. He also led the league with 336 completions, with the 2nd highest total of his career. His 35 touchdowns was a career high and also led the league, and he was 4th in the league with an impressive 56.8 completion percentage. One of the best years of his resilient career, as at the age of 34, he himself was coming off an injury-plagued season where he missed half the year. Clements was a tried and true leader, a commander on the field, a soldier who kept things organized and dominant. He had 3 1,000-yard receivers, 2 of which of course have made this All-Star team, and had great communication with running back Willard Reeves, and knew he could count on his offensive line. He wasn't afraid to get out of the pocket, but could also hit those quick 1, 2, 3-step passes out of the gate. And he could burn you defensive backs long or short, or, hey, midway. Clements was a danger everywhere, and he knew how to call an audible on the fly, and his ability to use that brilliant mind of his to read a defense was uncanny. However, he would call it a career on top of his game, despite many feeling he had more left. He leaves the game with a couple Grey Cup rings as well. And with all that, he is indeed the final All-Canadian selection, the 2nd of his career, which is quite surprising. His only other one was with the Bombers in '84, the Grey Cup season. And again, the East dominates the offense, but of course, courtesy of the former Western Bombers. But still, 8 spots out of 12, 2/3 for the East. The closest before this was 1983, when the East-West split offensive selections with 6 each. It is the first time since 1975 that the East led in offensive selections, and that was 8 as well. That indeed ties the rare record. So out of the 27 Eastern selections, a monster 10, just one more than the West, made it to the Hall of Fame. That's right, just above 1/3 of this All-Star team has received that honor. The first to do it was Tom Clements in 1992. And 8 years later, in 2000, his favorite target, James Murphy, saw an induction. That same year, Grover Covington of the Ticats got his just due. And in 2003, Chris Walby, Clements' big protector of the Bombers, was enshrined. And, well, it took another 9 years, but another Bomber, Tyrone Jones, was posthumously inducted in 2012 as he tragically passed away in 2008. Argo star offensive lineman Dan Ferroni got recognized in 2013. 3 years later, his teammate Rodney Harding was inducted in 2016. One other Bomber, James West, gained enshrinement as well. Punter Hank Alisic waited a long time, but he was honored in 2018. And then Mike Walker, the Ticats defensive lineman, got his long overdue induction in 2021. There are definitely some on this Eastern All-Star team you can still make an argument for, including 3 Bombers, such as offensive lineman Nick Bastaya, who had a great career, again, 6 All-Star selections. Actually, would end up with 7. And I also say Willard Reeves, despite his short career, I still say he should be inducted, as he was dominant in that time and won enough accolades to earn the honor. Scott Flagel was probably the best safety of the 1980s. Where's his induction? I also think Argo defensive lineman Gerald Bayless deserves a deeper look, as he had a tremendous career with a lot of accomplishments. And also Howard Fields, a Ticat defensive back, was a 5-time All-Star in 9 seasons. I think he deserves a look. Also, I should add that Chris Schultz also made the Hall of Fame in the media category. The totals are exactly how the Eastern standings are, which, well, makes perfect sense. The Bombers led with 12 selections, almost half, and split all their selections down the middle between offense and defense on both sides, which basically sums up their great season as they were dominant on both sides of the ball. The Eastern champion Argos, however, weren't too far behind with an impressive 9 selections. 5 coming on offense thanks in large part to their amazing offensive line that allowed Gil Finnerty to have a great year. And also many would say that their defense deserved a lot more love with just 2 selections coming on the defensive line. And they did have 2 more on special teams. Some say they even should have 3. The Ticats had 5 selections, 4 of which were coming on defense, and indeed that was their most consistent part of the team in a very inconsistent year. The Ottawa Rough Riders had a mere 1 selection, and that was at kicker on special teams. Some feel it, again, it was a sympathy vote, but others believe receiver Mark Lewis, who led the league in receptions, 94, was grossly overlooked. In overall All-Canadian selections, the East wins out with 17 out of 27. They only had 6 the year prior, again, as the Bombers moved to the division. It definitely shook things up. The last time the East got this close was when they split down the middle with the West, 13 and 13 in 1977. The last time the East won the selection process overall was 1975, with 14, and this indeed sets a new record for them. The Bombers led the way with a massive 10 selections on the All-Canadian side of things, 4 on offense, 6 on defense, again showing how great they were on both sides of the ball, but especially that defensive secondary, one of the best in CFL history, with 4 selections. The Argos surprised with 6, and 4 of them came on offense. Again, their defense was much more of a highlight overall, some would say, but they did have a lot of standouts on offense, and of course had a special team selection at punter. BC shockingly only has 4 selections, 3 of which coming on defense, to no surprise. But it's crazy as Grey Cup champion Edmonton only had 3, tying them with last place in the West, Saskatchewan, but 1 each from offense, defense, and special teams. The Ticats only had 1, but it was well earned for Mike Walker. And the Stamps, despite a winning 10-8 record, had none. Some felt they were done dirty in that regard, and I might have to agree. While dead last Ottawa at 3 of 15 to the shock of nobody had none. And indeed, that does it for our look at the 1987 CFL All-Stars, a polarizing season with many changes that shook the league up, and also delivered, however, one of the finest Grey Cup games of all time. Any other seasons you'd like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments below. And in the meantime, like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, I'll see ya!